Jake Morrison stared at the screen showing Earth below and felt his heart stop. The blue planet that had been home to 8 billion people was now covered in orange flames and black smoke. Giant alien ships hung in space above it like dark metal. Clouds firing beam after beam of deadly light at the cities below. Each beam erased millions of lives in seconds. The Zephyrian Empire had arrived 3 days ago with a simple message for humanity. They called humans a virus that spread too fast and fought too much. The galaxy had no place for such a dangerous species. Humanity had 72 hours to surrender and accept peaceful death, or the aliens would make their ending slow and painful. Jake commanded the Luna Prime defense station that orbited Earth's moon. His job was to protect the planet, but his weapons were like throwing rocks at a giant metal beast. The alien ships were each the size of small moons, and their shields turned his strongest missiles into harmless sparks. He watched his home world die and could do nothing to stop it. Dr. Lisa Carter worked in the deep bunkers under the Rocky Mountains where the emergency government had moved when the aliens first appeared. She coordinated the escape ships that were trying to get as many people off Earth as possible. Every minute counted because the aliens had made it clear that when the 72 hours ended, they would hunt down any humans who tried to run. The escape ships were not meant for long space travel. They were mining vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners, and anything else that could fly and carry people. Lisa knew most of these ships would not survive the journey to other star systems, but staying meant certain death. At least running gave them a chance. Captain Alex Rodriguez flew his warship New Horizon toward the massive alien fleet. Behind him came the last 50 ships of Earth's Navy. They all knew this was a suicide mission, but they also knew it might give the escape ships time to get away. Alex had served in 3 wars, but he had never felt fear like this. The alien ships were so big they blocked out the stars. The battle lasted only minutes. Human weapons barely scratched the alien hulls while their return fire cut through Earth's ships like they were made of paper. Alex watched his friends die one by one as their ships exploded in bright flashes. When his own ship started breaking apart, he aimed it at the nearest alien vessel and hit the engines at full power. The explosion was beautiful and useless. Down on Earth's surface, people ran through burning streets trying to reach the last evacuation centers. The aliens had started with the big cities, but now they were destroying everything. Farms, small, towns, forests, and even empty deserts were being burned clean. They wanted to make sure no human could hide anywhere on the planet. Commander Ben Carter led one of the last groups of people to an escape ship. He had been a soldier for 20 years, but nothing had prepared him for this. He carried children who had lost their parents and helped old people who could barely walk. The ship was meant for 200 people, but they packed in over 1,000. It would be a hard journey, but it was better than staying. The escape ships launched from hidden bases around the world. Some were destroyed by alien patrols, but most made it into deep space. They scattered in different directions so the aliens could not follow them all. Each ship carried a piece of humanity to the stars, along with the memory of what had been lost. Amy Foster was on one of the ships that escaped. She had been a teacher before the invasion, but now she helped take care of the 300 people, crammed into their small vessel. They had food for maybe 6 months, and no idea where they were going. The ship's computer showed dozens of star systems they might reach, but most had no planets where humans could live. As Earth burned behind them, the survivors looked ahead into the darkness of space. They had lost their home, their families, and almost their entire species. The aliens thought they had won, and that the human problem was solved forever. The Zephyrians announced to the galaxy that they had brought peace by removing a dangerous species that threatened everyone. But the aliens had made a mistake. They thought that destroying Earth and killing most humans would end the threat. They did not understand that humans became most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. The survivors scattered across the galaxy were no longer the same species that had lived on Earth. They were something new, something harder, something that would not forget what had been done to them. The few million humans who escaped would spend the next years learning to survive in the cold darkness between stars. They would become ghosts that haunted the galaxy, striking from shadows and vanishing like smoke. The Zephyrians had tried to erase humanity, but instead they had created their own nightmare. 5 years had passed since Earth died, and the galaxy had forgotten about humans. The Zephyrian Empire controlled all the major trade routes, and their client species lived well under alien rule. Peace had returned to the stars, and the threat of humanity seemed like a bad dream that was finally over. Sam Blake floated in the cargo bay of a stolen Zephyrian supply ship and studied the alien technology around him. He had spent these 5 years learning everything about how the enemy's machines worked. Hidden in the asteroid fields of dead star systems, human survivors had torn apart alien equipment piece by piece until they understood every circuit and power cell. The first target was a mining convoy carrying rare metals to a Zephyrian shipyard. Sam's team of 12 humans had been watching the route for months and knew exactly when the ships would pass through empty space far from any help. They disabled the escort vessels first with weapons that sent electrical storms through alien hulls, then boarded the cargo ships. The Zephyrian crews never saw them coming. The humans moved through the ships like silent death, wearing suits they had built from stolen alien technology. When they were done, they left the ships drifting empty in space with only one message carved into the metal walls. Earth remembers. Maria. Santos had designed the new human ships in secret workshops hidden inside hollow asteroids. She took the sleek designs of Zephyrian vessels and made them even better. Her ships could slip past alien sensors like shadows and strike without warning. They were painted black as space itself and made no sound as they moved between the stars. The attacks grew bolder as more human survivors joined the hidden fleet. They hit mining colonies where aliens dug precious metals from dead planets. They destroyed research stations where scientists studied new weapons. They cut communication lines that carried messages across the Empire. Each attack was fast and clean, with no survivors left to tell what had happened. Dr. Kevin Walsh had been a scientist who studied alien life before the invasion. Now he used that knowledge to hunt the very species he had once admired. He knew the Zephyrians were ruled by strict laws and rigid thinking. They could not adapt when faced with an enemy that refused to follow any rules of war. The alien commanders tried to dismiss the attacks as equipment failures or raids by space pirates. But the pattern was too clear, and the message was always the same. Earth remembers. Someone was hunting Zephyrian ships with deadly skill and perfect knowledge of their weaknesses. Colonel Amy Foster led the most feared unit of human raiders. They called themselves the Nighthawks, and they specialized in infiltrating alien bases. Using stolen biomechanical suits, they could disguise themselves as other species and walk freely through Zephyrian facilities. They would plant bombs in power centers, steal important data, and leave behind more mysterious messages that made the aliens afraid. The client species that served the Zephyrians began to whisper about the dead humans who walked among them. Some claimed they could phase through walls like ghosts. Others said they could predict alien movements before they happened. Fear spread faster than any weapon as stories grew with each telling. Commander Ben Carter had survived the destruction of Earth by leading his people to safety. Now he led deep space raids against the most heavily guarded Zephyrian secrets. His target was information about their homeworld, a place that no other species had ever seen. For centuries, the aliens had hidden where they truly came from. The raids on research facilities yielded fragments of data that Dr. Rachel Thompson worked to decode in hidden bases. What she found in the alien computers changed everything the humans thought they knew about their enemy. The Zephyrians were not the oldest species in the galaxy as they claimed. They had systematically destroyed dozens of civilizations before. Humanity, always using the same methods and always claiming they brought order to chaos. The revelation spread through the human resistance network like wildfire. They were not just fighting for revenge against the species that had destroyed Earth. They were fighting to prevent future genocides against other innocent civilizations. The Zephyrians were serial killers on a galactic scale, and humanity had become their worst nightmare. Captain Steve Williams began making contact with other oppressed species across the galaxy. Many alien civilizations had grown tired of Zephyrian rule, but had been too afraid to resist. When they learned that humans were successfully striking back against the Empire, some began providing secret help in the form of intelligence, safe, harbors, and supplies. The Zephyrian High Command found themselves fighting not just human terrorists, but a growing rebellion that spread across multiple star systems. Species they had conquered generations ago were starting to remember what freedom felt like. The empire that had seemed unshakable was beginning to crack under pressure from within. Patrol fleets began disappearing without sending any distress calls. Mining operations would go silent for days before rescue ships found them empty. Communication. Relays that had worked perfectly for centuries suddenly failed all at once. The Zephyrians realized they were dealing with something far more dangerous than random pirates or equipment malfunctions. The humans had become something the galaxy had never seen before. They were a species that grew stronger through suffering, and more dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. They struck from the darkness between stars and vanished like smoke before help could arrive. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Zephyrian Empire was learning what it felt like to be afraid. The human resistance had grown from scattered survivors into a coordinated nightmare that haunted the entire galaxy. Operating from hidden bases on dead planets and inside hollow asteroids, they had become the bogeymen that alien children feared in their sleep. What had started as desperate revenge attacks had evolved into something far more dangerous. Colonel Amy Foster commanded the unit that the aliens feared most. The Nighthawks specialized in infiltration missions that seemed impossible to anyone who still thought like a civilized being. They would steal alien biomechanical suits and use them to disguise themselves as other species, walking freely through the most secure Zephyrian facilities, while death followed in their footsteps. The latest mission took Amy's team to a military research station orbiting a gas giant in the Proxima system. They had spent weeks studying the facility's routines and identified the perfect moment to strike. During a shift change when security was distracted, 12 humans in stolen alien suits walked through the front door like they belonged there. They moved through the corridors with perfect knowledge of the station's layout, heading straight for the main computer core. While 2 humans stood guard, the others connected devices that would copy every piece of data in the alien database. They worked in complete silence, communicating only through hand signals they had developed during years of operating behind enemy lines. When Zephyrian security discovered the breach 3 hours later, they found only empty corridors and a message burned into the computer core's metal housing. "Your empire dies with 1,000 cuts." The humans had vanished like smoke, leaving behind no trace except missing data and the growing fear that nowhere was truly safe. The stolen information revealed something that changed the entire war. Dr. Rachel Thompson decoded the files in a hidden base deep in the asteroid belt and discovered that the Zephyrians had detailed records of every species they had exterminated over the past 3,000 years. Hundreds of civilizations had been erased from existence using the exact same methods that had been used against humanity. Commander Ben Carter led the deep space raids that targeted the aliens' most closely guarded secrets. His ships were ghosts that appeared from nowhere, struck like lightning, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. They had learned to think like predators, studying their prey for weeks before attacking with surgical precision. The latest target was a convoy carrying Zephyrian officials to a secret meeting. Ben's raiders followed the ships for days, staying just beyond sensor range while they gathered intelligence about security patterns and escort procedures. When the convoy entered an empty system to refuel, the humans were ready. The attack came from 6 directions at once. Human ships materialized from behind asteroids and disabled the escort vessels with electromagnetic weapons that fried their electronics. The raiders boarded the command ship and captured 3 high-ranking Zephyrian officers before security could react. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving behind disabled ships and terrified survivors. Under interrogation, the captured officers revealed the location of a major Zephyrian conference, where military leaders from across the Empire would gather to discuss the human problem. It was exactly the kind of target that could deal a devastating blow to alien morale and prove that even their highest commanders were not safe. Captain Steve Williams coordinated with resistance cells across multiple star systems to plan the most ambitious operation in human history. The conference was being held on a heavily fortified space station in the heart of Zephyrian territory, protected by 3 fleets and surrounded by weapon platforms that could destroy entire armies. But humans had learned to think differently than any other species. Instead of attacking the station directly, they would strike at the conference through subterfuge and psychological warfare. Teams of infiltrators would pose as alien delegates while saboteurs planted devices throughout the facility. When the trap was sprung, the galaxy's most powerful military leaders would learn what it felt like to be helpless. Dr. Kevin Walsh had discovered that the Zephyrians' greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Their rigid, hierarchical society made them incredibly efficient at following orders but terrible at adapting to unexpected situations. When faced with an enemy that refused to follow any rules, they became confused and made mistakes that humans could exploit. The operation began weeks before the conference, when human agents infiltrated the catering services, maintenance crews, and security companies that would serve the event. They moved equipment and personnel into position while alien commanders focused on external threats, never imagining that danger could come from within their own carefully controlled systems. On the day of the conference, Admiral Victoria Price watched from a hidden observation post as Zephyrian leaders from across the Empire gathered in what they believed was the most secure location in the galaxy. They had no idea that dozens of humans were already inside the station, waiting for the signal to begin the most audacious attack in the history of interstellar warfare. The psychological warfare campaign had already begun. Holographic projectors hidden throughout the station displayed images of the species that the Zephyrians had exterminated. The faces of the dead stared down at the alien commanders as they tried to conduct their meeting, a constant reminder of the crimes they had committed in the name of galactic order, when the electromagnetic pulse devices activated simultaneously. Across the station, every piece of Zephyrian technology failed at once. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as human raiders emerged from hiding places and began their hunt. The most powerful military leaders in the galaxy found themselves trapped in a metal tomb with an enemy that seemed to appear and disappear at will. The message left behind when rescue forces finally reached the station was simple, but terrifying in its implications. The dead demand justice, and we are their voice. The Zephyrian Empire realized they were no longer fighting scattered refugees seeking revenge. They were facing something far more dangerous, a species that had learned to weaponize fear itself. News of the attack spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communication. The aliens' client species began to whisper that maybe the mighty Zephyrian Empire was not as invincible as it seemed. If humans could strike at the heart of alien power with such precision, perhaps other species could find the courage to resist as well. The Zephyrian High Command gathered in their most secure facility deep within the core worlds of their empire. For the first time in 3,000 years of galactic domination, they faced an enemy they could not predict or control. The humans had become something unprecedented in their experience, a species that grew stronger through suffering and more dangerous when cornered. Admiral Victoria Price had spent months infiltrating the ruins of an ancient Zephyrian archive on the dead world of Caridian 7th. The planet had been abandoned for millennia after some forgotten catastrophe, but its underground vaults still contained records from the early days of the Empire. What she discovered there would change everything the Resistance thought they knew about their enemy. Hidden in crystalline storage matrices that had preserved data for thousands of years, Victoria found the true history of the Zephyrian species. They had not always been the galaxy's supreme predators. Long ago, they had been peaceful explorers who fled their homeworld when it was destroyed by an aggressive alien species that consumed entire star systems. The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. The Zephyrians had once been victims just like humanity. They had watched their world burn and their people die at the hands of merciless invaders. But instead of learning compassion from their suffering, they had become the very monsters they once feared. Over thousands of years, they had transformed from refugees into genocidal conquerors. The information spread through the human resistance network like wildfire. Encrypted messages carried the truth to hidden bases across the galaxy, where surviving humans struggled to comprehend what they had learned. Their enemy was not an ancient evil that had always ruled through fear. The Zephyrians were traumatized victims who had become abusers, perpetuating an endless cycle of violence and death. General Paul Anderson developed what became known as the Echo Protocol, a psychological warfare campaign that would exploit the Zephyrians' deepest fears and buried guilt. Human raiders began leaving behind more than just threatening messages. They planted holographic devices that told the stories of every species the aliens had exterminated, forcing them to confront the magnitude of their crimes. The first deployment of the Echo Protocol took place during a raid on a Zephyrian military academy where young aliens learned the art of conquest. While the cadets slept, human infiltrators placed hundreds of small projectors throughout the facility. When the devices activated at dawn, the entire academy was filled with the voices and faces of the dead. The psychological impact was devastating. Young Zephyrians who had been taught that their empire brought order to a chaotic galaxy suddenly faced the reality of what their civilization had become. Many suffered complete mental breakdowns as they realized they were being trained to become mass murderers. The academy had to be evacuated, and several cadets required extensive psychiatric treatment. Dr. Sarah Mitchell made contact with the Viridian Collective, a secret alliance of species that had hidden from the Zephyrians for centuries in the dark spaces between stars. They possessed ancient technology that could track quantum signatures across vast distances, potentially revealing the location of the Zephyrian homeworld that had remained hidden for millennia. The Viridians had been watching the human resistance with growing interest. They had survived by becoming masters of concealment, building hidden cities in asteroid fields and nebulae where Zephyrian sensors could not find them. When they learned that humans were successfully striking back against the Empire, they decided to risk everything by offering their help. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Turner led advanced reconnaissance teams to probe the outer defenses of Zephyrian space. What they found was an empire beginning to fracture under the pressure of constant attacks and growing internal dissent. Different factions within the alien hierarchy were debating how to handle what they now called the human crisis. Conservative. Zephyrian leaders wanted to commit their entire military to hunting down every human survivor and finishing what they had started. Progressive factions argued that the resistance was proof that their methods had failed and that the Empire needed to change its approach to governing the galaxy. The debates grew heated as fear and uncertainty spread through alien society. The Human Intelligence Network reported increasing signs of civil unrest within Zephyrian territories. Their client species were beginning to question the wisdom of supporting an empire that seemed unable to protect itself from a handful of human survivors. Some alien worlds had stopped sending tribute payments, claiming they needed their resources to defend against human raiders. Captain Laura Green coordinated with resistance cells that had infiltrated Zephyrian propaganda networks. They began broadcasting the true history of the Empire's crimes to every world under alien control. The carefully constructed mythology of benevolent rulers bringing peace to the galaxy crumbled as species after species learned what had really happened to their ancestors. The psychological warfare campaign reached its peak when human agents managed to hack into the Zephyrian communication network during a live broadcast of the Empire's annual Unity Day celebration. Instead of triumphant speeches about galactic order, billions of aliens across hundreds of worlds watched holographic recordings of extinct species telling their stories of genocide and cultural destruction. The impact was immediate and catastrophic for Zephyrian authority. Riots broke out on dozens of worlds as alien populations demanded answers from their governors. Some client species declared independence and expelled Zephyrian administrators from their territories. The empire that had seemed unshakable was falling apart from within. In the deepest vaults of their hidden bases, human scientists worked feverishly to decode the quantum signatures that would lead them to Zephyr Prime. The alien homeworld represented more than just a military target. It was the source of the Empire's power and the key to understanding why an entire species had chosen to become monsters rather than learn from their own suffering. The pieces of humanity's greatest operation were falling into place. They had learned their enemy's greatest weakness was not their technology or their military might. It was their guilt and their desperate fear of becoming victims again. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Zephyrian Empire was discovering that fear could be more destructive than any weapon. 20 years had passed since the Zephyrians destroyed Earth, and the galaxy had transformed into something unrecognizable. What began as isolated human raids had evolved into a revolution that engulfed entire star systems. The mighty empire that had ruled for 3 millennia was crumbling as species after species joined the rebellion against their former masters. Admiral John Davis commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled, a collection of hybrid warships that combined human engineering with technology stolen from dozens of alien civilizations. They moved through Zephyrian space like a storm of vengeance, liberating worlds that had suffered under alien rule for generations and exposing the Empire's crimes to anyone who would listen. The fleet consisted of over 300 vessels ranging from massive battleships built inside hollowed-out asteroids to small fighter craft that could slip past enemy sensors undetected. Each ship carried veterans who had learned to fight with the desperation of those who had lost everything and the skill of those who had survived against impossible odds. The liberation of Zerion Prime marked a turning point in the war. The planet had been a major Zephyrian stronghold for over 1,000 years. Its population of native Zerians reduced to slave labor, while alien overlords extracted precious minerals from their world. When human forces arrived, they found a people ready to die for freedom rather than continue living in chains. The battle lasted 3 days and changed the face of galactic warfare forever. Human ships used tactics that no military academy had ever taught, striking from unexpected angles and using the planet's own gravity wells as weapons. They turned asteroid mining equipment into kinetic bombardment systems and converted civilian transports into suicide ships that rammed through Zephyrian shield walls. Dr. Elizabeth Young had finally cracked the quantum encryption codes that protected the location of Zephyr Prime after decades of painstaking work. The Zephyrian homeworld existed in a pocket dimension accessible only through a network of ancient gateways that the Empire controlled absolutely. For 3,000 years, no enemy had ever discovered where the aliens truly came from. The revelation that the homeworld was hidden in another dimension explained how the Zephyrians had remained safe while conquering the galaxy. Their entire civilization existed in a fortress that could only be reached through portals they controlled completely. Any attacking force would have to use the main gateways, allowing the defenders to concentrate their entire military at a few choke points. But humans had learned to think like guerrillas rather than conventional warriors. They did not need to use the front door when they could find a way to slip through the back entrance. Commander Matt Jones led a surgical strike team through a forgotten maintenance portal discovered in the ruins of an abandoned Zephyrian research facility. The maintenance portal had been built during the early days of the Empire when engineers needed emergency access to the gateway network. It had been forgotten for centuries and was protected by obsolete security systems that human hackers could easily bypass. 12 of humanity's best infiltrators slipped through the dimensional barrier, carrying enough explosives to level a city. What they found on the other side changed everything they thought they knew about their enemy. Zephyr Prime was not a world of gleaming cities and advanced technology as they had expected. Instead, it was a monument to genocide on a scale that defied comprehension. Crystalline spires rose from the planet's surface like twisted trees, each one containing the preserved consciousness of entire extinct species. The humans realized they had discovered the Empire's greatest secret and its most terrible weakness. The Zephyrians had not simply killed their victims and forgotten them. They had trapped the minds of billions of beings in crystalline matrices where they experienced their own deaths over and over again for thousands of years. The aliens fed on the suffering of their victims like psychic vampires. Captain Laura Green led her team through the memory core complexes while alien security forces searched frantically for the intruders. The preserved minds of the dead were completely aware of their imprisonment and begged the humans to end their eternal torment. Some had been trapped for millennia, reliving their final moments in an endless loop of agony and despair. The discovery explained why the Zephyrian Empire had become so obsessed with control and order. They were not just conquering the galaxy for resources or territory. They were harvesting the psychic energy generated by the suffering of their victims. Every act of genocide fed their civilization's power and extended their unnatural lifespans. The truth broadcast across the galaxy shattered what remained of Zephyrian authority. Their client species did not simply rebel against the Empire, they turned on their former masters with a fury born of betrayal and horror that transcended all previous conflicts. Worlds that had served the aliens for generations declared total war against everything the Empire represented. The Zephyrian military found itself fighting on 1,000 fronts simultaneously as their carefully constructed order collapsed into chaos. Species that had been enemies for centuries united against their common oppressor. Ancient grudges were forgotten in the face of a greater evil that had manipulated them all. But the worst revelation was yet to come. Dr. Robert Chen, leading the team that studied the memory cores, discovered that the preserved minds were not just conscious and suffering. They were connected to each other in a vast network of shared agony that spanned the entire homeworld. Billions of extinct beings had been forced to experience not just their own deaths, but the deaths of every other victim. The psychic scream that arose from Zephyr Prime when the truth was revealed could be felt across dimensional barriers. Sensitive, aliens throughout the galaxy collapsed as the combined anguish of 3,000 years of genocide washed over them like a tsunami of pure horror. The Zephyrian Empire had created hell itself and called it order. Human forces prepared for the final assault on the dimensional fortress, while alien fleets converged from every corner of the galaxy. The liberation of Zephyr Prime would not just end the war. It would free the tortured souls of countless civilizations and allow them to finally rest in peace. The nightmare that had begun with Earth's destruction was about to end with the fall of the greatest evil the galaxy had ever known. But the humans knew that victory would come at a terrible price. They would have to choose between justice and revenge, between becoming the monsters they fought or rising above the darkness that had consumed their enemy. Captain Laura Green stood in the heart of Zephyr Prime's memory core, surrounded by the crystallized screams of 1,000 dead civilizations. The preserved minds trapped in the alien matrices had been conscious for millennia, experiencing their own deaths in an endless loop while their psychic energy fed the Zephyrian Empire. What she had discovered was not just genocide, but something far worse than simple extinction. The truth that broadcast across the galaxy destroyed what remained of Zephyrian authority in a matter of hours. Their client species did not merely rebel or declare independence. They launched themselves at their former masters with a rage that burned like the fires of dying stars. The empire that had ruled for 3,000 years collapsed in the span of a single week. But humanity's greatest challenge was just beginning. Dr. Robert Chen led the team studying the memory cores and made a discovery that chilled him to his bones. The trapped minds were not just suffering in isolation. They were all connected in a vast network of shared agony where each victim experienced the deaths of every other being the Zephyrians had ever killed. Billions of souls were drowning in an ocean of accumulated horror. The preserved minds begged for release from their eternal torment, but freeing them presented an impossible choice. If the humans destroyed the crystalline matrices, they would be committing genocide against the very victims they were trying to save. If they left the cores intact, they would be perpetuating the same crime that had driven them to war in the first place. Colonel Gary Smith proposed a third option that would have seemed impossible to anyone who had not spent 20 years learning: to think like guerrilla fighters. The human resistance had become experts at psychological warfare and turning enemy weapons against their creators. They would use the memory cores not as instruments of torture, but as tools of justice. Working with alien engineers from the liberated worlds, human scientists began modifying the crystalline technology. Instead of trapping minds in endless suffering, they would create a new kind of prison where Zephyrian war criminals would experience the deaths of every being they had killed. The aliens would finally understand the true cost of their crimes from the perspective of their victims. Emperor Xylan IX, supreme leader of the Zephyrian Empire, was captured alive when human forces stormed his palace on Zephyr Prime. He had ruled for over 800 years and personally ordered the extinction of dozens of species, including humanity. As the crystalline crown was placed upon his head, he would become the first to experience the new form of justice. The process began slowly, as Xylan IX's consciousness merged with the vast network of preserved minds. He felt the terror of a child, watching her planet burn. He experienced the despair of a father holding his dying family. He lived through the final moments of warriors who fought hopeless battles against impossible odds. For the first time in his long life, he understood what his empire had truly done. The last thing Emperor Xylan IX saw before his individual consciousness dissolved into the collective suffering was the face of Jake Morrison, the human commander, who had watched Earth die from Luna Prime. The man who had lost everything had become the instrument of perfect justice. The cycle of violence that began with one world's destruction ended with the fall of an empire built on accumulated horror. The galaxy watched in amazement as humanity chose justice over revenge and understanding over hatred. The species that had been marked for extinction became the guardians of galactic peace. They could have used their victory to become the new oppressors, but instead they chose to break the cycle of violence that had consumed the Zephyrians. The liberated minds of the extinct species were finally allowed to rest in peace after millennia of suffering. Their consciousness was transferred to peaceful virtual worlds where they could exist without pain or fear. Some chose to fade away into final rest, while others remained to help guide the galaxy toward a better future. But the work of justice was far from over. Thousands of Zephyrian war criminals faced the same fate as their emperor, experiencing firsthand the suffering they had inflicted on others. The process was not revenge, but education, forcing them to truly comprehend the magnitude of their crimes and the value of the lives they had destroyed. Admiral Susan Taylor, granddaughter of one of the original Earth survivors, oversaw the construction of the Galaxy Memorial where Earth once orbited. The massive station served as both a monument to the dead and a warning to future generations about the price of hatred and fear. Billions of crystalline matrices house the peaceful memories of extinct species, preserving their cultures and achievements for all time. The new galactic government was built on principles that humanity had learned through their long struggle for survival. No single species would ever again hold absolute power over others. Technology would be shared freely to prevent any civilization from becoming dependent on their conquerors. Most importantly, the right to exist would be considered sacred and inviolable. In the deepest reaches of space, where new threats might someday emerge, human ships continued their eternal patrol. They were no longer refugees or raiders, but guardians, who watched over a galaxy learning to live without fear. The species that had been hunted to near extinction had become the protectors of all life. The nightmare that began with Earth's destruction had ended with the birth of a new age of peace and cooperation. But the humans who patrolled the dark spaces between stars would never forget the lessons they had learned. Freedom required eternal vigilance, and the price of peace was the constant readiness to fight for what was right. The galaxy had learned to fear extinction, but it had also learned to hope for survival. In the memorial gardens, where children of a dozen species played together under artificial skies, the preserved voices of the dead whispered their blessing on the living. They had not died in vain if their sacrifice could prevent future suffering, and, in the command centers of human starships that drifted like silent sentinels through the cosmic void, officers watched their sensors for any sign of emerging threats. They were the children of Earth's ashes, forged in the fires of genocide and tempered by years of impossible struggle. They had become something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that would rather die than allow others to suffer as they had suffered. The Watchers in the darkness would never sleep again.